Jenny Dynamite. And my cousin was happy to be able to go when he comes to school. Saturday off. So maybe we'll get you back to you're working class teachers. I know we're being a panelist because of me involved, president involved, and now Gabrielle wants to cooperate with our board to do some stuff so that we save people. So this could be a very nice group that gives people options. Because I mean, she understands star. But that's who the teachers or therapists I might have to go. I'm not sure if I do. It could just turn out great.
I'm a big fan of Gabrielle's and Alex. Her husband's a mentee of mine.
Yeah, that's what she was telling me.
Yes.
Have a seat.
I will. Terrific.
Good morning. Good morning. And welcome to the Center for Nonprofit Excellence here at United Way of Central New Mexico. I'm excited to see such a great turnout this morning. And I'm going to go over a couple of logistical details with you first. So restrooms are out past reception. We've got water and coffee for you. And it's great to see you all here. Fundraising is a very important role of board members and one that they are often reluctant to do. And so we have three great presenters today to help you and your board overcome fear of fundraising and learn to have fun with it. And so first we have Brian Colon, who is a lawyer with Robles Royal and Anaya, and he has been named Outstanding Young Lawyer of the Year. He's one of New Mexico's 40 under 40 power brokers and a force for fundraising. He has also been named Volunteer Fundraiser of the Year by the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Brian serves as the president of the Spanish Colonial Arts Society, and he is also on the UNM Alumni Association, and he has served on the boards of the Kino Theater Foundation and the Popejoy Hall's Board of Directors, and others. So that's just a smattering. He is very involved in the community, has lots of experience working with boards, and is really great at motivating them and getting them involved. Sitting next to Brian is Sandra Ortzman, and Sandra is the Director of Development, Planning and Evaluation for Enlace Comunitario.
Nice.
And they have gone from having no development officer to having Sandra. So for those of you who think your organization is too small, none is too small, none is too large. And let's see, Enlace also won an award this year for their evaluation methodology, a national award, which was a very huge accomplishment and honor. Thank you. And then sitting next to Sandra is Tim Sheehan, who is the Executive Director of the Boys and Girls Club of Central New Mexico. And he has more than 35 years experience working with Boys and Girls Clubs throughout the United States. He's an Executive Director, and he brings that perspective to having a fundraising board. And so I'm not going to take up any more of their time. Now, I think the next thing on our agenda is to ask you what are your top questions and concerns that you would like our panel members to address today.
So I read through your tips for engaging board members in fundraising, and our board does a lot of these things already, and we have a completely apathetic board when it comes to fundraising. We do one large, for us, fundraiser a year, and we ask our board members to sell tickets to that event, and even that is so challenging to get board members to go out to their friends, and these are people that have some connections in the community, and ask for purchase of a ticket to an event, much less doing any other kind of generic ask throughout the year.
So is the question how to motivate
The question is, how do we motivate those people? How do we, beyond the things that I'm reading here, how do you get them interested and engaged?
Okay. Who else has burning questions or issues? Paul?
On a small board of a nonprofit with 2 staff people, to what extent can board members effectively carry out something like a membership campaign or other tasks that a development director would typically do? Lead.
Okay, anyone else? Finish writing. Okay, Josephine.
One challenge that we have on our board is when we say the word fundraising, we immediately get this glaze. Is there a way you can present it without saying the word?
Fundraising. The glaze.
Other. Okay, anything else?
Jen, well,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, also for a small board and only one part-time employee, how do you identify those projects for fundraising that are going to be successful?
And Jeanette.
I just want to know if it's appropriate to set like a specific goal around how much money a board member should bring in on top of their own personal gift. Whether that's through other donors or for events or things like that.
Have we captured them?
Two more in the back row there. Three more. Three, four.
Double bunch back here.
Okay. Yes, I am.
My biggest thing that I've noticed, I've been on fundraising boards for a really long time in Albuquerque. You know where I'm going to go with this. There's a rubber chicken dinner every 5 minutes in the city. And how do you differentiate yourself so that you're not just another rubber chicken fundraiser and you know what I mean? Okay.
My way is just to tell them that that's what it is.
What do you say?
Just give us your money and don't come.
Those are
And some
successful.
organizations
Those
do
are
that very
successful.
well.
Yep.
The non-event event. Okay. Yes?
So my question is, what is the profile of the perfect fundraising board member? And how do you attract them to your organization?
Okay.
I think Cindy had her hand up for a while, maybe
Cindy,
last.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. So I've come
come from an organization and you have an active board who does absolutely no fundraising whatsoever, so similar to the beginning question, how can we approach this and what are the strategies for engaging a board that has absolutely no experience?
I will retrieve that. Thank you. With no experience.
I need regulations on serving alcohol, because as soon as alcohol flows, the money starts to flow as well. So what are some of the regulations around what you need to do to have an event where you can?
So ask the guy from the senior law office.
How do we get our medication into our fundraising?
Okay, so for the last one, I will say that I will research that and get that information in a follow-up email to everybody.
Thanks,
That's-
Sephora.
That's a very
Thanks.
specific technical question. But for the rest of the questions, I will now hand them off to the panel.
Terrific. So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I want to say it's great to be in a room with so many great people who are passionate about the social profit sector here in our community. And when I look out and I start out by looking at my peers on this panel, I have to say that Sandra and Tim are giants in this community when it comes to the nonprofit sector, and it really is an honor to sit on a panel with them. And so I want to say thank you to the work, thank you to both of you for the work you've done, not just in the past, but that you continue to do, and now sharing your knowledge with this group. I am feeling sometimes like the little kid at the big kids table when it comes to these two. I really appreciate
Just got that big award, come on.
No, well, oh, and that's the other thing. Did you like that introduction, the 40 under 40 Young Lawyer of the Year?
Yeah.
It shows that Google still works, right? Like, when was I a young lawyer? I had a lot more hair back then, and I'm sure in the world not 40 under 40 anymore. But I appreciated Sephora being so generous and taking me back to my youth. I appreciate you very much. I am most pleased to be with you today, and hopefully, and the room is really long, and we don't have a sound system, although the acoustics in this room are one of the best rooms in the community to have an event. But if you can't hear me, if I wander a lot, you know, on this day of Hanukkah, as we start in just a few hours, I will wander around the room because I like to be true to my heritage. And that makes me a wandering Jew. So, see, Ellen got that joke.
You
Thank
stole my
much.
line,
I
Brian.
did. Oh, so I even brought my dreidel to celebrate today. You know? my son sent me with it. So, but none of that's going to help you get your board to fundraise. So we're going to get on to the meat of the presentation. The reason I was asked to serve on this panel is because many years ago I started having experiences in the social profit sector. I will tell you that I was raised in Valencia County, New Mexico. I came from abject poverty. I was the recipient of every government benefit out there that you can imagine, whether it was blocks of cheese and powdered milk and canned peanut butter, or whether it was Pell Grants to go to college. I was the beneficiary of all those programs. The reason that's relevant today is it's because it's that backdrop that gives me the passion to serve in the nonprofit sector today, even as a lawyer and a professional in the community. And I think it's important that you know what gives each of your board members the passion to have said yes to you when Ellen said, will you serve with me? Or when Kathy said, will you work with our board? Something gave them the passion to say yes. And frankly, and hopefully, it wasn't just because Jenny's such a wonderful lady. Because unfortunately in this community, that's how we build a lot of boards, right? We connect people to persons who are at the head of the table as opposed to connecting people to their passions, right? I mean, you've seen it, right? And I've done it. I have done it. So that leads me to the part of the history that I've lived that I want to share with you today. And that was about 15, 16 years ago. We at the University of New Mexico, I was a student at UNM School of Law. I was the graduate student body president. And Pope Joy Hall was making a change in its leadership. How many of you have been to Popejoy Hall? Let's see, we have something in common. Not just my red hair and freckles. Popejoy Hall was having a change in leadership, and they decided they needed a new director of Popejoy Hall. And I met this incredible individual who was, this is fantastic. Are you having trouble hearing me? No? But just in case, right? See, she's a belt and suspenders kind of gal. Right? She's got the backup for me, just in case my belt doesn't work. Is this better or more distracting? Or
I like it.
You like it? Well, if Jenny likes it, I like it, okay? Jenny and I are going to be close by the time this is all over. And Ellen, how come you don't have your name on, okay, every one of you put your name on your tags now. I had to do it, you do too. Ellen, I want to know your first name at least and who you work with, all right? That's relevant. George, how you doing, buddy?
Good to see you.
If I lose you, I'm going to be pretty sad, so stay with me, okay?
I'm with you.
All right, I appreciate that. Does the mic help?
If you want to use the mic, use the mic.
We're in good shape? All right. So back to my story. You still with me? Remember where I was, right? Popejoy Hall? All right, Popejoy Hall. So we had this new interim director of Popejoy Hall. His name was Tom DeCotch. And Tom was a pretty smart guy. And he's currently the executive director today, 15 years later. He's doing a great job of running an organization that was losing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, literally hemorrhaging, to the tune of $250,000 to $500,000 a year. And the university went out and hired him and said, look, you have two choices. Either you turn this ship around or we close down Popejoy Hall Performing Arts Center. The university can no longer afford to subsidize Broadway series and the presentations that you do for our community. So what Tom did was a little bit of research. What he realized was that in the old days, the students used to help fund Popejoy Hall through student fees. So he went up and looked and said, okay, well, who's in charge of student fee funding at the university? Well, I happen to be in the great position of being in charge of student fee funding. So he came to me and said, I got a great plan. We're going to reconnect the students. We're going to bring them back into Popejoy Hall. We're going to reintegrate education into our performances, and we're going to make this happen, but I need your help. So I agreed to help him. The next step was, he said, thanks for getting us back on board with student fee funding, but have a bigger vision. Because $50,000 in student fees helps us bring students in at a discounted rate to Popejoy Hall, but it doesn't help us do our education outreach to the students who need it most in New Mexico. Exposing students to the performing arts and higher education in a way that they've never been exposed before. He said, we need community support. I need a vehicle to help educate this community about the benefits of Popejoy Hall and its education programs. So will you help me start a community board? Right? So I said, absolutely. So about 25 of us got together to do this work session to determine the feasibility of having a community board and a fundraising effort. Now I want to speed up the story because I'm at 5 minutes now, and I want to be respectful of my co-panelists here and move along. But what I want to tell you is, we started out the board of Popejoy Hall, and it was a bunch of great community folks. None of us, not 1 out of 25, wanted to talk about the F word. Not one of us. We all wanted to talk about programming. We're passionate about education. Let's reach out to 5 counties and bring thousands of kids into Popejoy Hall and get them excited about higher education and performing arts and why it matters. But none of us wanted to go out and raise the money. Heck, I was a kid. I'd never raised money much of my life before, other than going around with a fishbowl in my neighborhood to raise money for the Muscular Dystrophy Association. That was all I'd ever done in fundraising. So we started this board. Nobody wanted to be a fundraiser. We had all these great committees. Every committee except a development committee, right? Because we were grassroots. We were a community board. We were going to be helpful. We're going to talk about programming. We're going to talk about education. We're going to talk about everything except fundraising. So I sat on that board for about 4 years. And then I was asked to leave the board. And I said, look, if I become president of this board, we go from a community working board and dealing with programming and everything else to a development board. Because at the end of the day, we're never going to take these programs to the next level if we don't get the dollars in the door. And I chaired that board for the succeeding 5 years. I served for a total of a decade on that board, from the time of its inception to 10 years. And we went from raising $0 and serving 5,800 children to raising over $1 million annually and serving over 58,000 kids. Now I just want to tell you that it was painful. Nobody wanted to do it. I made some enemies. Because there are people that were at the table that said, well, I got involved in this organization because I didn't want to fundraise. I want to talk about programming. I want to go to the booking convention in New York and decide whether we bring Les Mis or Cats for the 27th time to Albuquerque. Right? But I really said, you got some choices. You can either give, get, or get off. Because at the end of the day, we can't serve this community with Pope Joy Hall if we don't get the dollars in the door. And we set up some real goals, and we held ourselves accountable. Fast forward to the last 12 months. I became president of the Spanish Colonial Arts Society Board, concurrent with being president of the UNM Alumni Association. We had the same situation at SCAS. There was a bunch of folks who loved to get around the table and talk about Spanish colonial art, retablos, micaceous clay, straw, weaving, colchas, all that great stuff. But nobody was out there doing the ask and making it happen. So again, what did we do? We set ourselves some goals, and we forced each other to be accountable. And we had the same policy. The first year we implemented, you either give or get $2,500 a year, period. And then your executive directors, and those of you that are in those lead roles, have to be committed to tracking. Because if you don't give that report at the end of the year like I did last night to my board, they don't think you're going to hold them accountable. You know why? Because you're not gonna. If you're not tracking, if you don't maintain the data, you will fail at this. You will fail. Next year, we have each board member who has signed off and committed to giving or getting $5,000. Now that could be through events, it could be through contributions, it could be in kind. But I will tell you, we went from 2 years ago having board activity at the level of about $55,000 to last night I handed out statements that represented amongst 13 people, over $120,000 worth of activity. What's 13 times 2,500? It's $17,500. That was my goal in terms of board participation, right? And we did over $100,000. Why? Because people knew we were tracking. We are inherently competitive. Even the people that don't want to fundraise are inherently competitive. And as an executive director or a leader on a fundraising committee, you have to help them with the fundraising tips you got and help them understand that they're not just in charge of the F word. More importantly, they're in charge of the E word, engagement. Their job, George's job, is to connect people to the organization who are willing to be engaged. Because once they're engaged, they'll write the check. George.
On this tracking, how do you share with your board who's meeting their goals and who's not meeting? Do you do it publicly or do you take them in the closet?
Mr. Richmond, you asked a perfect question. So how do you handle that? We handled it very discreetly. What we did is we reported the top lines last night. We reported the top lines. But we also gave everybody a very individual and personalized letter that said, this is the productivity that we have tracked to your name. If we missed anybody who came to the table as a result of your efforts, we want you to let us know. Now, do I care, Kathy, that 2 board members may take credit for Wells Fargo Bank's $5,000? I don't care. It doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, if you care enough to tell me that you helped Wells Fargo, next year, you're going to do it again. And next year, you're going to bring 2 people to the table because I'm giving you credit. We want to know that our efforts matter. And the only way you can do that when it comes to fundraising is quantifiable data. And you got to track. You got to track. People were thrilled last night to hear those numbers. Now, were there a couple of my board members that did less than 2,500? There was one. There was one. And he or she knows exactly who he or she is. And I suspect that we might get a response to our end of year appeal when that individual gets it in the mail, or got it in the mail last week. I really do. Especially after the activity and the conversation that took place last night at the board meeting. Because it was incredibly encouraging, all the way around. Because people knew they were all pulling in the same direction. Now, the Spanish Colonial Arts Society may be still running a deficit budget and relying upon our reserves, but we cut in 1 year how much that reliance was by over 35%. We have turned the corner. But we didn't do it alone. We didn't do it with the executive director working in his office all by himself. We did it because the board got engaged. I'm way over time, but those are the 2 stories that I wanted to commit to tell you. I do? That's excellent. Oh, that includes my Q&A, right? See, Tim's keeping me honest here. He's my accountability partner today. He's my accountability
But I'm
partner.
trying to keep you engaged.
And this has to be the first time in the history of New Mexico where you have somebody who gets called a politician all the time, goes under time for the presentation, right? So I got 4 more minutes. So the two takeaways, if you have a working board, what I call a working board, or a community board, right, of people who don't have deep pockets or lots of resources, but they want to be involved in all the decisions you don't want them to be involved in, right? Isn't it true that the 2 out of 3 calls you get a day that take the longest and the most amount of your time are the things that you've already got taken care of? You don't need help. You don't need input. What you want them to think about on that board is how to engage people so that it can translate into a check for your organization. And all I think you have to do is be upfront and honest. And you got to do it now. Don't wait another quarter. Don't wait again till July 2016, your next fiscal year starting out. It doesn't help. You got to do it now. And blame it on me, right? Go to your next board meeting and say, look, I listened to this redheaded freckle-faced guy, and he said the only way we can turn this ship around is if I'm really mean and I say that every board member has to get involved in development. Not the F word, but development word, right? I need your help to engage people with our organization because we need a deeper and wider database of people who care about the work we're doing in this room every day, or outside every day if you're Mandy's Farm. Right? That's what you got to do. Blame it on me. But I'm telling you, it works. 2 out of 2 times I've seen it work. We had anemic development at Spanish Colonial Arts Society when I took over as president. And we had no fundraising when we started the board for Popejoy Hall. Now Popejoy Hall has grown to the point where it has a full-time committed development officer. She's doing a great job. Mary Ellen does great work for us. And I'm no longer engaged with Popejoy Hall, but they continue to enjoy great success. And they've got a board, and now I think it's even official. It's like board of trustees. Ooh, very fancy. Very fancy. Right? But they're raising the money. So I don't care what you got to call these folks. Call them whatever it takes to get them to give, get, or get off. Right? And you're going to lose a couple. I promise you, you will. And it's going to be painful because they're going to be the ones that help found your organization. It is. Try to honor them on their way out the door. And guess what I did? I turned it into a development opportunity. I threw a dinner to celebrate the fact that the person who's not raising any money is finally walking out the door. Right? And I made money. I love that. I love that. I love that. So the format is we're each going to do some presentation. We're going to take a couple questions. Then we'll come back and make sure that each of us hit these top lines, right? And come up with options and opportunities to answer these questions. So bottom line, it's absolutely not just appropriate. In fact, scratch out the word appropriate and put imperative. Yeah. Imperative. It is not just appropriate, it's imperative. You got to do it. And I'm telling you, don't wait 6 months. Send out a message with your holiday greeting card from your organization saying, next year, we're going to get the job done when it comes to development work, and I need your help. All right, let me take a couple questions from the floor that may be specific to the 18-minute rambling that I've just done. Yes, ma'am.
So my
Amy
question
Beal, right?
is, yes.
Amy. Nice to see you.
So Brian, let's say you have a board member that is not contributing anything. Not contributing by bringing money in or giving money, and they've served on this board for, a while. Who makes that, or basically who's responsible for telling that board member, thank you, but no thank you? Is it the executive director or is it the board chair?
Jeanette asked a great question, right? Everybody heard? Who tells that person you're not pulling your load, so we're going to throw a fundraising dinner and get you out the door, right? And that has to be the board chair.
Okay.
Right. Because at the end of the day, you want that person and that person's universe of influence to be upset with you and not the organization. It's once removed, or at least as once removed as it can be, right, in this conversation. Right? And if you make it your executive director, that person's never going to be able to get another touch from the organization and feel good about it. Agreed?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You bet. Robert.
So on your board, you said that you had everybody successful except for one. what happens if you have majority of your board or a high majority of the board that isn't pulling their weight? How do you motivate those people to start going forward with it if the tracking doesn't seem to be working?
So Roadrunner Robert asked a perfect question. What if you have the reverse situation on your board where you've got one person who's pulling their weight and the rest of the guys on the board are not doing it? You've only got that one female who's cranking it out and the rest of the board is pretending they don't hear you. So then you get Bill. Where'd Bill go? Also my Roadrunner Food Bank guy. There you go. Hey, Bill. I think that the answer is, again, holding people accountable and tracking data. If you can't wait to the end of the year like I did last night and tell the board members they're not doing their work. After that first quarter, give them a report. After the first 6 months, give them a report and say, we're 50% of the way done with the year and you're 5% of the way done with your commitment. There's a problem here. How can we fix it? What can I do to help you succeed? Right? As board president, that's my job. If I've got 12 board members who are not performing, I'm doing something wrong. I'm not engaging my board. So I have to make those 12 phone calls and say, look, I know that at our retreat this summer, we said we were all going to raise $2,500 or we're all going to give or get $5,000. I appreciate the $250 contribution you made, but we're halfway through the year, and I just want to make sure you have everything in place to succeed as we move forward towards our goals. That's a tough conversation to receive. What are you going to say on the other end of that conversation? Right? You're going to be kind of embarrassed to get another call from Pecoso or Mocoso. That's me. Right? You're going to be, so you're either going to tell me, well, and you're actually going to come up with, I found this. People will always come up with an answer to the question. Well, if I had some of those brochures, if I had some of those, oh, goodness sake. Here's the good news. I got 5 cases of them in the office. It's no problem. They'll be there tomorrow. No problem. Okay, one more question, then I got to turn it over, because now I'm over time, I know that.
For a working board who largely hasn't been involved in fundraising, what would you think would be a first reasonable goal to start with? Like $1,000?
I think any goal is a reasonable goal. Okay. You just have to start marching down that path. You just have to start marching down that path and get a culture of giving and getting on your board. It's establishing a culture and an expectation that's clear at the beginning of every single year. You have to clearly communicate these goals. Now, in order to do that, the way we did it when I took over Pope Joe's board is we brought in a facilitator who volunteered her time. I think I took her to lunch. But she volunteered her time to help facilitate. And it's that old adage, right? Where by the end of the facilitation, it was great because every other board member thought it was their idea that we should have goals for fundraising in the year ahead. Right? It wasn't my idea. I still became the bad guy over the course of the next 24 months. Believe me. Because I, again, tried to hold people accountable. But here we are today, raising seven figures, and Tom had over 60,000 kids, or 58,000 kids last year go through Pope Joe Hall.
Do you ever use in-kind donations?
Absolutely. But only if it's a true in-kind donation that impacts our budget. Yep. Only if it's an in-kind contribution that impacts my budget. In other words, if you're Albuquerque Tent Company and I have to rent a tent every year, and somebody from your organization is on our board, and Albuquerque Tent Company or Garcia's Tent Company says, we're not going to charge you this year because we appreciate Lauren's work on your board, and we want to give Lauren that as an opportunity to support the organization, absolutely. That's a $5,000 contribution, and it counts. But if I never rented a tent before, and Lauren works for Garcia Tent Company, and Garcia says, we're going to give you tables and chairs at no charge, well, if I don't need tables and chairs, it doesn't count, right? Because at the end of the day, it's budget neutral. And I don't need budget neutral work, right? Not if I'm going to have a true development board. Does that make sense? Yes? Yes? Okay, with that, I'm going to say I appreciate your patience. I hope you found a couple nuggets in this 20 minutes. And I hope my panelists don't feel like I've overstepped. And with that, there's really, he's got $1 million smile and a heart of gold. And it really is a pleasure to get to work with him on this panel. Give a big round of applause for our good friend Tim.
And yes, a big round of applause to Brian. So I'm going to take it from a different approach, from the executive director approach a little bit. And where I've come into boards, and I've worked with 6 different boards in my career. I've actually been with Boys and Girls Clubs for 39 years around the country. And I've got in, and it's been a cultural change. You know, it's a culture change for a lot of people. When all of a sudden you've got a quote unquote what I call a social service board that kind of, we're there because it feels good, because we happen to have, and I don't know if they're in the room or not, but say if they had a family member, they were with Alzheimer's, and they had a family member that had Alzheimer's, so they wanted to be on that board, that kind of stuff. So it's a culture change. You need to understand that if you want to run the organization, number one, nonprofits need to run like a business. So that's very important. We can't be social service organizations. We need to run it like a business. We have cash flow issues. We have everything else just like a business does. And I think that's very important from the board perspective and the executive director perspective. And I think what's really interesting is when I came, and so that's kind of an overall approach, but I'm going to take my Albuquerque, I've been here for the last 3 years in Albuquerque, and they changed that sign on me up there. It said Land of Enchantment, and they changed it to Land of Entrancement. I came down here for 3 months, and I'm here 3 years. What can I say? But I like it. But I took over an organization down here that did have a give or get in place, $2,500, but we had a very small board, and we still had several of those social service type people on the board that would always come in and be glad to stuff envelopes and do different things like that. But the bottom line is what the bottom line is. You got to pay the bills. You can't pay the staff by stuffing envelopes. So with that said, we really started exactly what Brian said. He took several of my comments, but enforcing it from our board development committee kind of oversees that. Our chairman of the board may get involved, but the board development department or that committee actually comes and looks at the list that I present them. And we do that twice a year. We do it mid-year. We're on a calendar year, so I do it mid-year and then at the end of the year, what people have done throughout the year. With that $2,500 give or get, that's only part of it, because we also want them involved and active on committees and everything else. But the fundraising part of it is really important because it's number one, it's when you bring on a new board member, first of all, you need to, what we do is we take that new, and I'm going to take this from bringing on new board members at this point and then orientating people. You need to, number one, be very upfront with them from the beginning. You need to say, listen, this is our requirements to be a board member. We have a one sheet we give them up front when we take them to lunch. Usually myself and a board member, maybe our board development chair, or it could be who's ever recommending them to the board. But we're up front with new board members right away. Say this is what it's going to take to be a board member with us. We're at a point right now, when I came on board, I had 12 board members. We went down to 9. We had our strategic plan that we completed, and we said, oh yeah, okay, we're going to go 25, that's the max. We're at 28 right now because we've had 3 or 4 people ask to be on our board at this point. And so they understand what the requirements are of the organization. And what we do is, number one, so you tell them up front. Number two, you have orientation. So you orientate, you have an orientation program. There's resources. Center for Nonprofit Excellence has several different trainings throughout the year. Or you can there's lots of different people throughout this community that do that outside of your organization if you want to bring someone from the outside. Or, what I really like is peer-to-peer. I bring my board members in now. They've been through enough of it that it's a peer-to-peer type orientation. But we really walk people through and say, this are the requirements of fundraising. This is what we need to do. And also educate them on the board. There's fundraising and there's friend-raising. Friend-raising is definitely out there too and can be part of that. But, friend-raising, again, doesn't pay the bills. The fundraising side of it does. And so we go through an orientation process with everybody. And I've worked through a training program before called the Art of the Ask. People are afraid to ask a lot of times. And that's really what happens is they're afraid to ask. And I have several board members right now that still have a problem asking sometimes. But I'm there to help them as their executive director. Another board member may help. We may go on a call with them. We may give them certain resources. And Brian, I laughed when you said, oh, I need a brochure, that's what I'm waiting for. You know, I've had that a few times too, you know. Don't worry, I'll get you the brochure. In fact, hopefully if it's emailable, you'll have it like in 5 minutes. But I think that's really important too, that you get all the resources to them at the same time. But I think it's, you know, what I'm saying there is it's a whole process of developing your board. So some of you, and I know in this room, because I looked at the different organizations that were attending, we have a cross section. We have people that number one, very small boards, very small organizations, and we heard that from some of the questions earlier on, to a roadrunner at the other end, you know, very, very large organization. And then we also have boards that are basically at beginning stages, and we have boards that have been around for a while. So I think bringing board members on from the beginning, and Brian already addressed about what you do with board members that are not successful on your board, and kind of how you have a party for them, make more money. I love that, Brian. That was great. So they didn't even know they were raising money for the club or for the organization at that point, right?
That's right.
Brian did. He had a motive, but they didn't know that. So I think it's really important at that point that you know, you really have a upfront conversation with people. You have a good orientation. Do you start, like Brian said, the question came earlier, what is a beginning number? We have a $2,500 give or get for our organization, but most of my board members are way over that. But we have a minimum set. And we also feel it's very important. One of the mindsets we've had in our organization is not just a $2,500 give or get, which has done well now. Our budget basically in the last 3 years has gone from $550,000 to, we just approved a budget last Friday of $1.3 million. So we're growing, and the need's out there. And my board wants to see us grow more. So if they want us to see more growth in the organization, serving more kids every day, then that means they got to kick in too. So they understand that, and it's all part of the culture. And so with that said, it's very important that you really continue to really be there for as a resource to your board. And as I say, with the small organizations, some of your board members do the stepping up, because if you only have an executive director and one part-time person, those board members that you may have a resource development committee or a development committee, what do you want to call it, that really oversee some of your development. What I started to say earlier, and I backed up, I'm sorry, was my board had a problem at first. They were having no problem making their money in the way of what they need to raise above and beyond, probably 2 to 3 times. The issue was a lot of it was coming from their corporations. And I said, no, we need to be sure that 100% of our board is giving themselves. And sometimes that doesn't happen. And so that's been a cultural change for us. And right now we've just been conducting our second, really since I've been here, second out of 3 years, annual campaign. So each board member, we put them through some training, and number one, we have a board member we have actually co-chairs this year of our annual campaign. Those board members meet individually, and sometimes myself, sometimes just them, with every board member. And number one, first thing they do is ask for their gift if they haven't given a gift yet this year. And it's very touchy sometimes. Sometimes, you got to recognize that if someone owns their own company and they do a gift from their company, that's really their money, if it's their own company. But you want to be sure that number one, that they give a gift. And then also we had where you would ask 2 other people. So a face-to-face ask 2 other people. And then we present the materials and that kind of stuff, so they have that. And then we've always told our board members that I do have a development director, but either the development director or myself are available if they want to go on that call with them. And so it's still a learning process. We've got people in all different stages and that kind of stuff. We still have a long ways to go. But I think it's what I'm really pushing my whole portion here on is education. Educating everybody all the way down the road, and be sure that a lot of times you're going to be holding hands with them. But if that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do. And that may be staff holding hands, or maybe another board member holding hands. It all depends there. The couple other things I just wanted to mention is, we hear time, talent, and treasure. What do we want out of board members? Time, talent, and treasure, well, that's very important. We really need all three. Some board members say, well, I can just give you the time. You need to kind of really analyze that within your own organization. What do you need? What does your board need? Where is your organization going? And I hope that is, and I'm bringing this from an executive director side, ties into a strategic plan that you would do with your organization. So you really have a roadmap. So you're not just kind of running day by day, but you have some type of roadmap for the organization. Strategic plans for years were 3 to 5 years long. I don't believe in those anymore because who knows what's going to happen in this world these days. So I say, you know, I'm at about a 2-year strategic plan. We just are renewing ours right now. But I think that's really important to have because that can set up all of your your goals for the organization. And a big portion of our strategic plan is development. Because if we want to grow, we've got to have the horsepower behind it to grow to pay those bills. And that's very, very important to us. With that said, I think that's, but and the other thing is I've had board members, and not my current organization, but come on and they are representing a company. So they were told by their boss, by XYZ Bank, that you need to be on that board. And you really need to be sure that when you bring on board members like that, you need to be sure that they believe in your mission. They need to believe in your mission of what you do. Because, and I see a lot of head shaking here, but I think that happens to all of us. Yeah, I really need you on XYZ board. I think that'd be important. We're trying to spread out for whatever reason the company has, and it's hopefully good reasons. But the person's not driven that way. So I think that's very important when you're talking to your board, because if you're building that full team, you really need it that way. And that's really what I'm going to talk about today. I was just trying to talk about from the executive director level. And now I'm going to turn it over to the one and only Sandra.
Thanks, Tim. So, I think it would be overwhelming in New Mexico to have too many wandering Jews in a presentation, so I'm going to stay seated.
I'm a wandering Catholic.
I'm just kidding. Happy Hanukkah to anyone celebrating. So I'm really happy to be here, and I asked to go last because I imagined at this point in the presentation there could be some people in the audience going, there is no way I could ask my board members to give $2,500 or get off, right? There's not that buy-in for that. I mean, hopefully some of you are like, $2,500, we're going to go for $5,000, each. But I imagine there's some of you who are thinking, we can't do that. And so I said, I'd like to go last. I represent a much more grassroots organization, although our budget is actually very big. I mean, compared to, your budget. But I think in terms of our approach to board fundraising, we're in transition. So I am going to speak about how do we move from not being there to being there. So I hope that's helpful to some of you. Enlace Comunitario is a grassroots organization. We take pride in that. It's part of our mission. It's in our mission statement that we're a social justice organization. And so sometimes we have all these ideas about money is the root of all evil. And so just kind of knowing that that exists probably in some of the social justice folks that you might be recruiting, and really talking to them about money is just the driver, right? Money is the driver of all these amazing things that we're able to accomplish, or it could be used, the love of money maybe is the root of all evil. But so really knowing that exists and just tackling it head on is important. We have a $1.7 million budget. 95% of that, in full disclosure, comes from grants, contracts, and foundations. So our fundraising budget and goals is about 5% of our budget. So it's small compared to a lot of the other groups. Our board is not a corporate board. They're an incredibly grassroots, I think in many ways, service board, like what you're appropriately described. We are very intentional about having former clients on our board. We conduct our board meetings in Spanish, so that also limits a little bit the pool of who we can recruit. And I think in all honesty, we don't have a minimum give on our board, and I'm going to propose this to our board because I think it's important, but I know that there's going to be some pushback. So I think one of the key things to really do, especially if you're not executive directors who are sitting here, is getting the buy-in of both your executive director and then figuring out on your board for starting and for shifting, who can you get that buy-in from? Because you need to have allies. You can't go at this alone because people will be like, oh, well, she's not really connected to our mission. And really you are, because I think as Brian said and as Tim said, you can't accomplish your mission without the dollars to fund it, right? So it's really, but just know those are kind of some of the pushback that you will experience if you haven't already. I think that continually going to your board and doing reports, this is what we've raised and this is what we've accomplished, is really, really helpful for them to see the impact of the money that they're raising, especially if you are talking about a small amount of money relative to your budget, right? Because they're going to see, well, 95% of our budget's coming in through the door with grants. I don't understand why you're putting so much emphasis on me having to raise this 5%. I see nodding heads. And so, you know, at Enlace, that 5% over years has built our reserve. It has been our lifeline. It has been the reason we haven't had to pay or lay people off in the last 2 years when we haven't raised our entire budget through grants and contracts. So putting it in perspective and inspiring your board and connecting it to mission is really important. And you have an opportunity to do that at every single board meeting. So you can bring clients in to talk about their stories, but connecting it to mission and making them see why that 5% is important. It's really important. It's as important as the 95% that you're raising from the grants because it's unrestricted for the most part unless a donor has put some stipulation. So I wanted to talk about, a lot of people were like, well, what's realistic? I think that one thing that's really cool about fundraising is you build on things every year. And so we have an annual letter that we send out. Right now we expect to raise $20,000 from this letter. That letter started out raising less than $5,000. And so every single year that letter grows. And so I think you should be really realistic in your plan. And if you exceed your goals, well, great. But if you set a really high goal and you don't come anywhere close to it, I think that can be somewhat disappointing. So I included in the handouts for this presentation a development plan sample, and you could take it home. And I was reluctant to share it because I knew that there's some of you who have development plans that are like 50 times, more advanced. But I feel like for the folks with the smaller grassroots organizations, it can be a helpful start. And our development plan, if you looked at it, I've been at Enlace going on 9 years. If you looked at it 9 years ago, it had like 3 items, right? So now we have like 15 different items. So I think you should start small and figure out, what is kind of realistic to do. So a lot of people talked about what's the profile of the board member. And a lot of times we tend to think, well, who is really connected in the community? But there's 2 types of people in fundraising, right? There are people that may know so many people and they might actually have friends with lots of resources, but the thing that they would rather die than do is ask somebody they know for money. And then there's people that are comfortable asking people that they know for money. So your job is to figure out on your board what people are comfortable with. Would they rather ask a total stranger for money, or would they rather ask their friend? And that's a really important thing that I would advise you to do on a one-on-one basis with your board members, is just find out what are you comfortable with. Because they might know lots of people with money, but they might rather die than ask those people for money, right? And you're probably not going to change that person. So I think you have to know what's the strength of the person on your board. And maybe they know all these people with money, they would rather die than ask that person for money, but they would be willing to share their contact information and share some background information about that person. And you, who actually like asking people for money, could go and do that. So there's a collaborative role that you could have. And I think, and I don't always do this, but it's easier to tell you to do this, you can find out, from your board member what they're comfortable with, what their talent is. recently I reached out to one of our board members who's super tech savvy and asked him to do some promotion on social media. And I have not drank the social media Kool-Aid. I don't think it's like, you know, the ends all be all to fundraising. But if you have a board member that's good at that, it's, you know, it can bring some money in through the door. So it's important to really know what is the talent and the treasure of your board members, and those two things really cannot be separated. So I would advise you to start with that question. I think, you know, I'm curious as like a social experiment to see the reaction if I propose the minimum give or get number. I'm going to bring it back to my agency. We don't have that. But we do have an expectation that every single board member is a donor to the organization. We don't set that threshold because honestly on our board, I think it would make sense to have different thresholds for different members, right? We have former clients that are currently in transitional housing, you know, getting on their feet. I'm not going to say you have to give $2,500 or get it because I think that would be challenging, right? But what is a meaningful contribution to that person? And I think you can have that conversation and you can ask people to really think about what's meaningful. And you know, similarly, if I set that really low for somebody, that might not even be meaningful for another board member. So I don't, you know, where we are as an agency, I think we might have varying thresholds. But maybe not. Maybe I'm underestimating. So I hadn't thought about the minimum number. Isn't that crazy? I hadn't thought about that. So I'm going to go back and explore it. There's other things that you can do to get your board moving in the right direction, especially people that hate asking for money. Thanking people for giving money is like the greatest thing you can do. Because the number one reason that people give twice is because they've been thanked and they've been asked again, right? So this isn't a fundraising training, but your board can easily help you with the thanks. And I think on that handout sheet that supported it, there was a thankathon. That's a great idea. Every single board meeting, I do a report with all the people that donated since the last board meeting, and I divide up those numbers and I give them to all different board members to do thank yous. I give them a little bit of a script. I tell them it's okay to leave a message, and I tell them to let me know what happened when they made the call, just a little bit more accountability. And then I also know, did they actually get in touch with that donor? That is the easiest thing that you can start with, like when you go back to your agency, and you really can't thank someone enough. I don't think a donor is going to mind if they got 2 thank you calls. So I encourage you to do that thank you calls with your board, and that has been super easy for our board. They like that. It's good. And then I've also heard from donors like, oh my gosh, I got 3 calls. I can't believe I got a real in-person call. And so I know that person's more likely to give. So that's really easy for someone who's uncomfortable asking. I think if you have board meetings monthly or every other month, you have an opportunity to incorporate a training on fundraising at every single meeting. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time. Like, we had a video that we may or might not show today, but it's a 10-minute video. You could show a 10-minute video. You could have people practice doing an ask in a little, you know, do a little mini training and have them practice doing an ask. You could, you know, just do fun things. Like your board members should be able to state the mission of your organization. They should be able to ramble quickly off like 3 goals that you guys have as an agency. You can train them on that, and then you can have somebody get up and volunteer. And one of the funnest board meetings that we had where I did a mini training like this was I was like giving out candy for everybody who participated, and they were so amped up on sugar, so if you can't get the liquor license, David, you could give them the sugar license. So I think you can make it fun. Like the board really did have a lot of fun that night, but I ask for commitments in board meetings. I don't just do it one-on-one because, you know, let's use the group pressure a little bit to our advantage. So I ask for commitments and I acknowledge things that board members do, and that's great. We also have, you'll see like in our development plan that we have house parties. That's been a key fundraising strategy for us. It's way easier than doing an event. It takes a lot less resources, and it brings in new names to your database. And so I love house, and I actually love to party, so house parties are really fun. We tell people just show up, bring your checkbook. So board members have hosted house parties, and we, like, our board president is amazing, Pauline Lucero. She's amazing. You can't steal her for your board. She has done a house party 8 years in a row for Enlace. She does this auction all year long. She asks people for stuff, and she raised last year $13,000 at her house party. I mean, and that can be intimidating to someone who's like, I can't do that. And so you have to give people lots of different options. And we've had board members do brunches, do happy hours, do poker nights. So be creative and offer to help with the logistics of the house party. It's a lot easier than a huge gala event, which is like, who used that cheese expression?
Rubber chicken.
Rubber chicken, oh yeah, yeah. So the house parties can be more fun and more creative. So I would encourage that as another way that you can get people to start. And some people, like, literally, they're like, I don't know who I would invite. So you can maybe invite them to partner with somebody else on the board. So that's something we've done, is we'll have 2 people have a house party together, and one person feels like they can't bring a lot of people to the party, so they'll do a lot more of the logistics for the party. We have a development committee. That's a good thing to have. It's chaired by a board, but we have staffers helping with all of these things. I do think there is an expectation, and so for you who has like one, or someone has half a staff member, and you have 2 staff members, you know, you guys probably work way more than 40 hours a week. So, I mean, there has to be some return, but maybe you can leverage some resources out in the community. We have a VISTA volunteer who we end up spending $4,000 a year on, and I am tasking her with assisting the board with a lot of those things, because you know, it's not a good investment in Enlace's money to have me doing a lot of those logistical things. But it is a good investment to pay $4,000 for a VISTA volunteer for a full year. I have more that I could say, but I'm out of time, and you've had a question, so I want to ask your question.
Well, could you explain house party? I mean,
Yes.
how do you, explain that, and how you get people to come and give you money for that?
Awesome. So I will explain it, and then I also direct you all to a resource, and that is Kim Klein, who's actually come here and done some trainings. She has a book, or a couple books, about fundraising for social justice and social change. She has an article that you can find online on the how-to-dos for a house party, and it's also published online in Spanish. So I've given that out to my board and shared that. So it's a great resource. But house parties are simple. I mean, Pauline takes it to a whole other level, but I think you can, again, start small, build on that. Pauline's first house party raised $2,000. You know, so now she's up to $13,000. This year we have a goal of $15,000. So she and I, you know, agreed upon the goal and are working on that. And we provide a lot of agency support because it's become quite an endeavor. But a small house party, a good example would be to present to your board the opportunity to make their birthday party in a fundraising event for your organization. So encourage them to, you know, think of a list. The most important aspect of the house party is getting people there. So it should be their friends, right? Their friends who care about them, who would show up to a little event at their house. So they come up with the list, come up with the date and the time, you know, and then they send an invitation to friends, and it's explicit. It's not like, come to my house and then you whop them like with the ask for money, but you actually tell people, come celebrate my birthday for a cause. And, you know, for a cause to your organization. I can't read. Same. Oh, great organization. Thank you.
That's not what her thing says. What does her thing say?
Oh, Turkey's saying collaborative.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Amazing organization.
That's questionable, but.
So come to my birthday party, don't bring anything, bring your checkbook and make a contribution. And sometimes you can do like a minimum suggestion, but you know, it just depends on your audience. Sometimes people might be more generous if there's no minimum suggestion, but that's literally can be as easy as pie. And then I tell board members, you don't even have to do the ask at the party. You create the list, I'll help you create the invitation if you need help. We send it out to people. Your main job is getting your friends to this party. Like that, because it's a pain. I've done this before. You have a house party and 5 people show up and it's more expensive than anything. But I will show up, or you will show up at that house party, and you will say, thank you so much for coming, and thank you to Tim for celebrating his birthday in this way. And I want to tell you about SANE, and this is the incredible work that we do, and I want you to join us, and I want you to make a contribution. And Tim, for his birthday, has made the first check, or maybe at that party, Tim pulls out his check and says, here is my check, and then the checks start flowing in. So that's kind of the most simple thing you can do. And sometimes, if you have the resources in your agency, if somebody can't afford to host the party, you can even call Whole Foods for them and say, hey, Whole Foods, we're having this party to raise money for sexual assault nurse examiners. There's like nothing more important in the world. And will you provide the food? And they often will, you know, if you have 6 weeks notice.
I think that's exactly right. The only thing I would add on is, and my birthday's on January 26th. On January 24th, I'll be having a birthday party at my home to benefit the Spanish Colonial Arts Society. The only thing that Sandra didn't say I mean, everything she said is textbook and perfect. I think she's exactly right. The only small twist that I think is really important to make it really successful is, again, to connect to people's passion in the room. So what I'm going to be doing is I'll be bringing in 2 Spanish colonial artists to be doing demonstrations during my birthday party. So they'll also see not just those artists, but the students, the young kids who are being mentored in the Spanish traditional colonial art form. So they'll see where those donations are going.
Yeah.
So you got to bring in a couple of your nurses so they can talk to your guests.
Demonstrations won't work.
Demonstrations won't work. We don't want to do demonstrations.
Whoa.
But we definitely want to have a couple of the nurses there that can then talk about their story.
Right.
Talk about that story of being able to do that exam and actually get somebody to a place where they're comfortable enough to do something about in the process what happened. Right?
And it's a balance, right? When you do such incredibly heavy work too, there's a fine balance between inspiring and telling people what you do, and also it is a birthday party. So, because I work in the domestic violence field, and so it is a balance, and it's great to have survivors, but to keep it, I try to keep the program fairly short, and then everybody who goes to that party signs in, and everybody becomes put into the database, and they start giving on an annual basis, so you will grow your database. So
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's fun. I think my time's up, so now we're gonna have time for general Q&A.
I was going to say, I had about 4 or 5 different handouts, so hopefully you'll get some nuggets out of those too that I passed out there. So that's okay. I just wanted to say that from a Harvard Business Review to several other things about how to develop a strong board and those kind of things. So hopefully that stuff will help.
Okay. My question is, what are good approaches for recruiting board members? I mean, it's one thing to say, I'm with the Amy Beale Charter High School Foundation Board, or I'm on the Mother Road Theater Company, or I'm with ABC, and if there's dead silence, I don't go any further. But if there's any interest, then I try and draw it out. And can I get you on board 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, and just you get people involved.
I think one thing is what I do a lot of times is I do my homework ahead of time a little bit on that.
Okay.
That's part of it.
And then another strategy that we've done at Enlace is we have a development committee, and sometimes we'll invite folks to test them out to be on a committee. We have a finance committee too. We have they say, I want to be on the board, and we say, great, we don't really have any openings right now, but we have a development committee, and it would be awesome if you would join it and help us. And then you can kind of see if they're going to work hard or not. And then you can ask them. Yeah. So that's a good way to go.
I would just validate Sandra's point. We do a lot of committee work. Take those folks for a test drive.
That's right.
See if they're really committed to getting the job done, and then convert them over. And I would only also 2 other quick points on the thank you calls. I really want to tell you how important that is. With Pope Joy Hall in particular, the Monday and Tuesday of Thanksgiving week, we had receptions at the office, and each of our board members came in to just make thank you calls all day long. And at our next board meeting for the Spanish Colonial Arts Society, we'll take the first 10 minutes of the meeting to hand out thank you calls that came in on our end of the year appeal. And everybody's got a cell phone, folks. It's not as hard as it used to be. And we're going to take that first 10 minutes, and we're going to ask them to make the calls right then and there. Because if you send it home with them, the chances are they're going to do it about 50%. If you ask them to give you the feedback, as Sandra has said, accountability, it goes up from there. But at the end of the day, right then and right there is your most effective way to get it done. And on the social media, I just say this town, if you can tap into the right veins. We had an issue come up at UNMH to serve some kids with cancer during the holidays. I put it up on my Facebook and needed to raise $3,000. In less than 4 hours, I had raised $4,000 with people giving $100 a piece. And social media can be very, very powerful in this community because there's so many people in this room that overlap. And we all want to pull in the same direction. And social media is a great way to do that.
Brian, on the thank you calls, what times of the day do you think are best?
Anytime. And the reason it is because you actually don't necessarily want your board members to connect because it takes too long. Right?
That's true.
It's more effective in terms of time and things like that to get the call done, leave a message. No need to call back. I'm just calling to say thank you. I'm a volunteer. And to have the staff do it is fine, but it's not as effective. They're getting paid to say thank you, folks. But when you as a volunteer or a volunteer board member make that call, it is incredibly impactful. And to Sandra's point, the reason people give again is because they got positive feedback for giving the first time. Right?
Oh, yeah.
I can tell you who has thanked me and who hasn't thanked me. And I don't write checks with commas. But when I give you a small check, I'm going to remember whether you say thanks. I try not to, but it's just like me being a clock watcher. I can tell you whether you're right on time or late, even though I'm trying not to look at my clock.
It's like kissing babies.
Well, yeah, it's like, I got to kiss all the babies that come by, David says. You know, it's better than shaking the babies and kissing hands. I like to kiss the babies and shake the hands.
A thank you that goes out within 48 hours of receiving a donation increases the likelihood of a second gift by 40%. It's huge.
And then personalizing thank yous is gonna like up the ante, right? So have people write personal notes on thank yous. Your annual fundraising letter, like you have to invest a little, right? So if you just send it out through email, it's cheaper, but you're not gonna get as much as if you print it on nice paper and you send it out. And if you print it on nice paper and send it out, it's still not gonna get as much as if there's a personal note on it. And if you have someone who actually knows that person write the personal note, that's like your biggest bang for the buck. So you have to develop your database to sort it by the contacts, and then you give your board members, with enough time, their stack of letters, and then you get it back from them. And they have to write a personal note, and that's easy. Oh, yeah. Okay. How to identify successful projects? How about that one? What I would say to that one is like set a goal, like a realistic goal, and then think about how much time would have to get invested in. And if you're gonna have to invest so much more time in than the return, that's probably not a successful project. So I don't know if you would agree with that or would want to add to that. And so you can ask those hard questions to your board, because things that boards like to do is come up with grand ideas for you to implement. And you got to push back, right? You have got to push back, and you've got to educate them. And it's delicate because they're your boss. So you got to be like, that is a great idea, and it's probably not going to work this year for this reason.
All right, I'm going to take the rubber chicken dinner. And basically, number one is, and I've done special events like crazy. Special events have made $100, and special events have made $3 million. And special events are not, people give because they want to give. You're better off, there was the comment, I think you made the comment originally when it came up about having the no event. And I've done that before. You've actually sent out this really cool invitation to people. And we did this a long time ago when Blockbuster was in business, and sent out a package so it says, we're going to have a no event, we'd love you to come, but stay home. And so what we did was people donated at different levels, and for instance, if they had a certain level, we ended up giving them a movie pass from Blockbuster, popcorn and something else. It was something simple that we mailed back to them basically as a thank you type thing. But it was something that it was like, you know what, you go to enough events already. And we all know there's a ton of events in this area. I mean, especially when it comes to galas and golf tournaments. And I'm sorry to say we have one of each of those. But we try to, for instance, for our gala, we make it a little different. We have come up with kind of a fun thing that's become our signature event. And so the other day I was trying to get on, or I was requested to get on Mayor Barry's schedule for our gala. And I was talking to his office, and I know a lot of people in there, and I said, remind him what he did at our gala last year. I said, because he had a lot of fun. He was going to leave early, and he didn't leave early. So you got to have something fun, you know, something a little different. But overall, special events, the ask is better. Single out ask is a lot better that way.
Yeah, and I would also just try to connect your event to your mission somehow. Absolutely. In some creative way, right? So it's connected. I think that helps.
Do you want to choose one?
No, oh, sure. Speaking of connecting real quick, that's what we do. We bring in a lot of our kids to our gala, and they do a lot of different things. They do demonstrations, they're welcoming everybody, they're doing all kinds of things. So you got to have that connection somehow or another.
So I think really on this page, how to motivate a board and to what extent can board members lead a membership campaign, I think it really is the team that works for your nonprofit has to identify what is the area of focus. What does the team need most of all? If you're going to be developing membership, well then you've got to come up with a plan. You got to come up with some reasonable goals, some expectations, and communicate them to your board members. But if it's a bigger picture about development as opposed to membership, then again, you don't want to distract your board. We talk about multitasking, but there's a lot of good research out there. We can't do it. We're not multitaskers. And when you have a volunteer board, you got to be very direct, very specific, and very focused on what you want me to do as a board member. And the boards that get the most out of me are the ones that communicate clearly. Those are the ones that get the most out of me, every time. And at any given time, I serve on 4 to 6 boards. I mean, I've got a lot of board service because I'm passionate about trying to repay that debt to the community that I owe based on the childhood I've had that I talked about earlier.
This is going back to some of the earlier discussion. You know, you're talking about your board president, your board chair. What if your board chairperson is not motivated? You know, that's one of the challenges is how do you from a lower position help instill a culture of fundraising up?
I think it gets back to training and education, right? So number one, you have to communicate to that board president what your needs are. If you lay your needs out and truly resources are an issue, that board president's going to see it. Well, your job is to make the compelling argument and presentation that they've got to focus. If they're still unplugged, then you're just going to have to wait that person out and make sure that the next president does a better job of understanding what your goals are.
Part of our problem is that we often don't know what our need is when we do our budget because it's all case-based, right? So what happens is sometimes toward the end of the year, we find ourselves at a shortfall in a specific category, domestic violence specifically, because we don't have as much grant funding for that, but we don't know that at the beginning of the year.
But an emergency is the best reason to raise money.
Yeah.
How did I raise that $4,000 in less than 3 hours online? There was an emergency. There's a call to action. When I call you and talk about education in Spanish colonial arts, or I call you and talk about the Alumni Association, how we're going to remodel the Hodgin Hall that's been around since 1897, the first university building in New Mexico, blah, 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 right? But when we've got an emergency, the New Mexico Holocaust Museum has been vandalized, and it's $5,000 worth of damage. Give me a chance, I'll raise you $25,000 on that $5,000 worth of damage. Why? Because there's an emergency. You got to leverage those situations. Your situation's perfect. It's perfect. You got tons of capacity and don't even realize it. An emergency is the best way to raise money. Go ask the National Institute of Flamenco.
Yeah.
Marissa's doing a phenomenal job with the team over there. And all of a sudden, resources are not the kind of issue they were 18 months ago for her. And I've been trying to help the National Institute of Flamenco for a very long time. And I've been a very small donor for a very long time because I never write checks with a comma. But I've always paid attention to their mission and their work. And they had a tragedy and a crisis. And they've leveraged it in one of the most beautiful ways I've seen done in this community. I mean, each of you can probably speak to that, right? Can anybody not tell me what's going on with the National Institute of Flamenco? We all know, right? Why? They leveraged the emergency. They capitalized on the crisis. How's that for some alliteration for you? Huh? Does that make sense? Yes? We've got 9 minutes.
Other questions? Don't wait for the emergency if you don't have one. Keep going, but I agree. And then also manage it, right? You have to be careful. You don't want to send the message out that your agency is about to like explode. So it is, it's an opportunity, and you also have to keep sending out this message like, we are doing well, the doors are staying open, and your support will ensure that there's no interruption in services or something kind of like that.
Just to put a bow on that, I think that in politics we see that all the time, right? If you're ever on anybody's political fundraising list, right? It's always an emergency in the campaign. My goodness, if we just had $5,362.72, we can win this election.
And we'll match it.
And we'll match it. Now here's the deal. That's called overplaying your hand when you do 10 of those in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Right? So as a nonprofit or a political candidate, we have to be careful not to overplay our hand. To your point.
Yeah.
And I think I see it all the time.
Because you can send that message out, and before you know it, people will be like, Sane is shutting down, so you gotta, be careful too.
It's kind of like I missed work because grandma passed away, and the boss said, bury her this time.
Yeah.
It's the same excuse. You can't keep saying grandma's passed away, so I can't make it into work today. You gotta go, bury her this time. All right, David?
But when you look, as your organization, you have history in your organization of the events that have occurred. So look at your past history to project into the future of what your needs are going to be, and then just use one of those as a target.
That's a great point.
I just have a different kind of question. So we're in a unique position that we compete with other organizations that are doing the same thing that we are.
What organization are you?
Well, let's just say autism.
Okay.
So we compete, we don't necessarily compete, but we don't work with, and how would you suggest kind of capitalizing on the fact that there's more than one organization out here trying to raise awareness and funds for the same cause or the same disability?
I think that's the reality for all of us, and so I think you have to look within and find what's unique about what you guys are doing, what's your unique contribution, and if you're like, there is none, well then maybe there's a duplication, and doesn't make sense, but there probably is something that's unique about what you guys are doing, and so I would start from there and promote that. The other thing is, I know, and some of the civil legal services providers in the community have done their individual fundraising and have pooled their resources to do some collaborative fundraising. So we're kind of moving away from board engagement, but that's an option, right? So you can look at those other autism providers and maybe talk about, is it strategic for us to do something together? But I would also just ask that question. It's well, what do we contribute to the autism movement, prevention movement that's unique, and highlight that. So.
Do you have a Twitter feed for Enlace? I'm trying to tag you and I can't do it. Social media matters.
I told you I haven't drank the Kool-Aid.
I've already tagged you. I've already tagged you, Tim.
He knows that. We have a Facebook page.
I wanted to congratulate, who spoke up just regarding the Autism Network? Okay, I just want to say that I feel like in the last 2 years, the Autism Network and the people that are working on the autism spectrum have done a phenomenal job of bringing that message to the forefront in this community. Not just Polly's Run, but so many things that are going on in this community now. I feel like you've made some real progress. And I just want to give you that feedback on a really personal level. I've not been touched by autism in my life, but I pay attention. And I think there's a few people here that are working in the network, and I appreciate your work. Did she just say she was going to touch me all over the place? My goodness, this is a great presentation.
The Twitter feed is exploding.
I love the Center for Nonprofit Excellence. And I think I've worked for 2 years now. I was honored to do that. Now, before you leave, we got 5 more minutes, and maybe we just want to break so that you can get our contact information as you see fit or as helpful. But I want to say one thing before you leave. The Center for Nonprofit Excellence is a component project of the United Way Central New Mexico. We also do independent fundraising for the Center for Nonprofit Excellence so that we can provide increased quality in services, such as streaming video for our panels, which is something that I had as an aspirational goal many years ago. Now we do it. Our membership and our participation in these programs is increased, but that's also because we've been able to increase our outreach. So I appreciate the contributions you made on your way in to pay the fees, but at the end of the year, while you're doing your end of year gifts, if you've got a small gift, $25, $50, $100, I'd be remiss if I didn't say the people here at CMP are punching above their weight every day. They do more with less as they go down the road, and I want to say thank you to Sephora and the team here at CMP for our progress. You want to check on the way in, write a small one on the way out. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. And march on with your boards. You can do it.
2015 is going to be great for everyone in this room, so let's move forward. And if you need any of our contact information, drop up here. We'll all be here for a couple minutes, I think. Thank you again for coming today.
Thank you.